Part 1. What did the world dream of? Tell me something. When you close your eyes at night and the room falls away and your thoughts finally stop screaming at you, where do you go? Not your dreams, those little parades of nonsense your brain strings together to keep you entertained. I'm not asking about the flying or the teeth falling out or the old crush that suddenly appears in the hallway of a school you barely remember. I'm asking about the gap, the dark interval between drifting off and waking up, the part you never bring back with you, those missing minutes or hours where your mind is offline and something else could be standing over you and you would never know. Have you ever really thought about that? What if, during that gap, your body isn't as alone as you think? What if something stops in the doorway, leans in just close enough to listen to your breathing, and decides whether you're worth remembering? And now I'll make it worse for you. What if one night it wasn't just you? What if the entire world went into that gap at the same time? No night shift, no insomniacs scrolling their phones at 3 in the morning, no truckers on coffee and nicotine, no security guards watching empty lobbies on grainy screens, no one crying quietly at their kitchen table at 2:47 a.m., staring at the bills. Just silence. Every mind on earth switched to off in the same instant. Every pair of eyes closing, every light of consciousness going dark, like someone unplugged us. If that happened, what do you think could walk through the world while we were all gone? What could move down the streets, through the houses, over sleeping bodies and never be seen? What could be done to us, to our minds, to our memories, to our very sense of time, with no witnesses left to object? I am not asking these questions to scare you for the sake of it. I'm asking because 3 years ago, something very close to that happened. We call it different things now. Some people say the triple blackout. Some prefer the lost nights. The officials, the ones that still pretend it's all a misunderstanding, call it a statistical anomaly in subjective sleep reporting. I call it the 3 nights everyone slept through. And I mean everyone in the way that matters. You might think you didn't. You might remember going to work or staying up late or arguing with someone or watching some film you half remember. You might swear those nights were normal, but memories are malleable. Time is more flexible than you've been told. And if something had its hands on the world, wouldn't it start by getting its hands on your sense of time? I didn't find out about it through the news. Of course not. They never break the truth first. I found out the same way I find most things now, buried in the noise of late-night forums and forgotten message boards, in places where people post about the things they're too embarrassed to say to a doctor. It began like this. Anyone else's sleep tracker bugged? Mine says I slept 31 hours straight. My boss is pissed, but I remember going to work. Then, Fitband shows I was asleep from July 11th to July 14th. No way. I had shifts. I talked to people, right? Then more, calendar skipped the 12th. I swear I wrote in my journal that day. The page is blank now. At first, it looked like what skeptics always like to say. Glitches, faulty devices, people misremembering things because human memory is a joke. But the posts kept coming. Not just from one country, not just in one language. Japan, Norway, Brazil, South Africa, Russia, Canada. People with different brands of devices, different lifestyles, different routines, all noticing strange matching gaps in the same 3 nights. Some posted screenshots from their wearable devices, lines of data that showed a solid block of deep sleep 3 nights in a row, with almost no interruptions, no tosses, no awakenings, no REM spikes. Just a flat, heavy bar of unconsciousness, like the brain had been put into low-power mode. You know what the normal world did? They laughed. They blamed firmware updates, manufacturing defects. One more reason not to trust tech, they said, while checking their phones again. The companies denied everything, of course. They always do. But then the medical records started to surface. Doctors comparing notes in private groups, complaining that their patients all reported feeling extra rested that week, despite EEG data showing us something cool. Off. Sleep studies that recorded universal drops in brain activity not seen in normal sleep cycles. Hospitals noticing that during those 3 nights, emergency room admissions dropped sharply. Fewer bar fights, fewer crashes, fewer overdoses, fewer panic attacks. 3 nights where people just stayed in bed, and all of this would have been brushed away, filed in some dusty folder under weird but not important, if not for one problem. Not everyone slept. A very small number of people resisted whatever came over the world. They stayed awake, or half awake, while everything around them dimmed. They watched their families slump deeper into the mattress. They watched their phones die, their clocks falter, the very air outside their windows become still, and they saw things moving in that stillness. I didn't find them easily. Most of them refused to talk. Those who did rarely made it through an entire conversation without shaking or going quiet for long stretches, staring at something just over my shoulder. But that's not where this story starts for you. For you, this begins with me, because I was one of the people who almost woke up. On the 3rd night, not the 1st, not the 2nd, only the 3rd, something went wrong. Whatever held the world in its grip slipped just for a moment, and I surfaced. You know that feeling when you wake up a second before your alarm, your body too heavy to move, your thoughts half formed. Now imagine that, but multiplied into dread, a thick, suffocating heaviness pinning you to the bed, not because you're tired, but because something doesn't want you to move. I remember a pressure in my skull, like fingers pressing gently but firmly against the inside of my face. My breathing slow, deeper than it should have been, like someone had turned down the volume on my lungs. Sound was wrong, distant, underwater, and I remember my eyes opening, not properly, not the crisp clarity of morning, just a narrow slit, enough to see my bedroom window, enough to see the street beyond it. My neighborhood is quiet. Old houses, fading paint, tired trees, streetlights that buzz when it rains. I know the pattern of night there, the late dog walker, the last bus, the glow of televisions in the windows of insomniacs too stubborn to surrender. On that night, there was none of that. The street was empty, not just empty of people, but empty of activity. Every window dark, every house still, no flicker of a screen, no distant hum of traffic, no wind in the leaves. It felt like the world had been paused. And then I saw it, At first I thought it was a trick of the light, a tall shape at the far end of the street, halfway between two lamp posts. Too symmetrical to be a tree, too still to be a person. It stood in the road, angled slightly towards the houses, towards the bedrooms, towards the people. Slowly, it turned its head, if you can call it a head. If you can call that turning, when the motion was too smooth, too deliberate, like someone rotating a camera on a tripod. One by one, it regarded each house, my neighbors, the couple across the street, the empty rental. It didn't walk. It shifted, as if space was folding under it, bringing it closer without the need to take a step. The distance between lamp posts seemed to collapse. The angle of its limbs didn't resemble bone. It was wrong in ways I couldn't process in that half-conscious state. Wrong in a way my mind tried very hard not to store properly. The last thing I recall is the sense that it had turned its attention to my house, not to the building itself, not to the roof or the door, to my window, to me, and then nothing. I woke 11 seconds later. At least that's what the device on my wrist says. A sudden spike in heart rate, a flurry of brain activity, then a full awakening at 6:47 a.m., just as my alarm began to ring. If that had been all, a strange half-dream, a few odd numbers on a chart, I might have written it off as well. But the world was full of people like me that week. People who woke up feeling wrong. People who checked their phones and saw 3 nights of uninterrupted sleep registered, despite swearing they had woken up to use the bathroom, to get a drink, to check a crying child. People who went to work and found co-workers asking, "Did last night feel strange to you?" It took months for the patterns to emerge, years for the data to leak, for the right people to compare the right sets of numbers. By then, the official explanations were already in place. Firmware glitch, solar interference, psychological suggestion after viral posts. They always have a list ready, but those explanations fall apart quickly when you talk to someone who stayed fully awake. I found the first one by accident. A woman in her 40s writing under a pseudonym on a forum dedicated to sleep paralysis. Her post was simple. "I didn't sleep those 3 nights. I watched something walk through my town. If anyone else stayed awake, I need to know I'm not alone." I messaged her, "Carefully, you have to be cautious in those places. For every terrified witness, there are 10 pranksters and 5 deeply unwell people." What she told me did not sound like pranking. It sounded like a confession, like the first crack in a dam. She described walking through her apartment building at 3 in the morning, stepping over the bodies of neighbors who had collapsed in hallways, on stairwells, in front of their doors. Not dead, just deeply, unnaturally asleep. She described the sky being darker than usual, as if some layer of distant light had been peeled away. She described an electrical buzzing in the air whenever she approached a window, the faint smell of ozone and rust. And she described figures, not just one, like I saw, dozens, moving in pairs, occasionally in threes, gliding down streets and across fields, stopping at houses, leaning close to doors, windows, walls. "They were taking inventory," she wrote. "That's the only way I can describe it. Like inspectors, walking through a warehouse of unconscious bodies." She said she screamed at them once. a panicked, impulsive act of defiance. They didn't react, not the way we do. One of them simply turned very slowly to face her directly, and although she couldn't see a face, she felt something make contact, something push gently against the front of her thoughts. They knew I was awake, she said, and they weren't expecting that. Do you understand what that implies? Whatever came over us during those 3 nights, it assumed compliance. It assumed you would surrender without question to the silence and the dark. It assumed there would be no witnesses left to tell the story afterward. That woman is not the only one. I have gathered accounts now from multiple continents, multiple cultures, multiple languages, all saying the same thing. The world fell into an unnatural sleep. Something walked freely through our towns and cities, and a handful of people, a tiny overlooked fraction, stayed conscious long enough to see it. One of them saw more than all the others combined. Most witnesses hid. They stayed behind curtains, under beds and closets, trying not to breathe too loudly while these visitors, these inspectors, glided past. But one person didn't. One person followed them. He tracked their route through his neighborhood. He watched them pause at intersections, tilt their heads toward landmarks, raise their arms as if feeling the invisible shape of something in the air. He followed them to the very edge of town, and he saw where they came from. I've spent the last 3 years trying to verify every detail of his story, checking timestamps, location data, corroborating background events. I believe him. I believe him more than I believe the official line, the corporate statements, the nothing to see here, move along press conferences. I believe him because when he describes the thing that turned to look at him, I recognize the way his voice changes. It's the same way my own voice changes when I talk about the shape in my street. Fear shapes a certain kind of honesty. He is the closest thing I have to a witness who watched the whole event play out while the rest of us lay helpless. And now, I think it's time you heard what he saw. But before I tell you his story, let me ask you one last question for tonight. If you discovered that the 3 safest nights of sleep you ever had were the ones where something else was in control of your mind, would you really want to know what it did with you while you were gone? Stay near the fire. In part 2, we'll listen to the man who didn't sleep at all.